Artificial intelligence meets gamification on today's amazing episode of the Artificial Intelligence Podcast with special guest Juliet Denny. Today's episode is brought to you by the bestseller ChatGPT Profits. This book is the missing instruction manual to get you up and running with ChatGPT in a matter of minutes. As a special gift, you can get it absolutely free at artificialintelligencepod.com/gift or at the link right below this episode. Make sure to grab your copy before it goes back up to full price. Are you tired of dealing with your boss? Do you feel underpaid and underappreciated? If you want to make it online, fire your boss, and start living your retirement dreams now, then you come to the right place. Welcome to the Artificial Intelligence Podcast Show, where you will learn how to use artificial intelligence to open new revenue streams and make money while you sleep. Presented live from a tropical island in the South Pacific by best-selling author Jonathan Green. Now, here's your host. So let's start right at the high level. What exactly is gamification? For people that are new to the world, this is most people that are interested in AI. And really, how does that influence someone's results, whether you're a course creator or a course consumer?
Okay, so gamification is not like game-based learning. A game is obviously something that everybody is really used to, online gaming and all of that kind of stuff. Gamification is using the mechanics that humans find appealing in game-based learning, and it basically applies those gaming mechanics in a non-gaming way, in a non-game way. Okay, so imagine, for example, you're in a corporate learning environment and you have to join the company. You then go through onboarding, and then after that, you might go through to how we work in a team, our culture, our vision, and those can be made into levels, and you can be awarded for how you apply that thinking, and you can get badges, XP, and rewards. It's that type of thing. On our platform, for example, we have levels, we have peer-to-peer battles, we have departmental battles for reinforcement. And so it's these types of things that you would utilize in a corporate environment in order to get people insanely excited. So on average, if you look at L'Oreal or HP or some of these clients, people are spending about half an hour a day on our learning platforms because it's fun and it's basically delivered in a super engaging way that people want to participate in, which is very unlike the majority of learning platforms where people are, can I just stick a pin in my eye rather than do my compliance training?
And so most people dread corporate training, corporate events, team building events. And it's always a struggle to pass on information that's important to your employees, but also make it interesting enough, because if they're just sitting there pretending to pay attention, it doesn't really get a lot of value across. So which element of the gamification is making the biggest bang for your buck? Is it about delivering, do the badges work? Or is it, even in the corporate environment, you're actually adding in actual prizes, like you can win a gift card here, or there's some type of physical real world implementation at the end of their kind of journey?
Okay, so the best way to look at gamification is, how does gamification work with the science of learning? Okay, so broadly in the science of learning, there are, first of all, you need to get the person's attention. Okay, and that is difficult. Okay, now a lot of corporate learning, as well as just a lot of marketing, just doesn't get that attention. Okay, so the brain does not start connecting and basically paying attention until that first criteria is met. So the first thing is attention. The second thing is concentration. So concentration for the time that you're actually learning the thing. And that's to do with lots of different things in terms of how you structure the information, in terms of how you reinforce the information. And then finally, you've got, how do you turn that information from knowledge into behavior? So then when we look at the gamification layers, we need to ask ourselves, so what gamification mechanics are going to create the environment that basically allows those three things to happen? So attention, concentration, and application, right? So the first thing is, what gaming mechanics can we use to gain attention? The first thing that we can do is we can use narrative, we can use story. We can also use the concept of epic meaning. So epic meaning is, why do this? What's in it for me type thing. So those are the types of things that gaming mechanics you would use in order to get attention. This is something, and you'd use the scarcity principle, use your competition principle. So these are the types of things you use in the first layer, attention. The second thing is concentration. So here, one of the things that's really important is the brain. If you look at Bloom's taxonomy, or you look at the way people learn, we need to ensure that the learning is basically delivered in a way that the brain can understand. So that means it needs to happen in broadly bite-sized chunks. You need to be able to apply it, and you need to get real-time feedback. In terms of how the gaming mechanics might work with that, you might have quantitative quizzes and battles in order to give people real-time feedback to ensure that they're actually keeping up. You might have spaced repetition that you could use kind of levels, or you could use notifications. Then you might have something like a social area, and that social area might have XP depending on the feedback that you give to the actual knowledge. And then finally, you would have the application layer, and the application layer would be how well are you actually applying that knowledge in order to drive business outcomes forward. And again, you would use things like praise badges. You would use things like live stream sessions, so that if somebody was particularly good at applying a certain topic, you would basically give them the opportunity to go live or whatever it might be. So reward mechanics. So for different phases of the learning process, you would use different gaming mechanics. And what we do know is that gaming mechanics, the more gaming mechanics you have, the more excitement you can generate within a gaming environment. So going back to your initial question, leaderboards, XP, rewards, does it actually work? No, not if it's done properly. If it's not done properly, you need a proper gamified strategy, and that needs to link to your learning objectives and learning outcomes.
Is a really common thing I see all the time is that when people are consumers, they shop one way, but as soon as they're creating for the same consumers, they think completely differently. An example is when someone is like creating a training course, they go, it needs to be as long and comprehensive as possible. It needs to be as many hours as possible of content. I go, oh, and when you buy something, do you buy it based on longer? They're like, no, I don't have time. And it's really small things like that. It's something that you see in marketing as well. Someone designs a business card that they would never want to receive. And it's because we somehow switch in our minds that bigger means better, longer means better. And I can tell you when I sit down for a training and it's a 2-hour video, I go, oh, that's not happening. Like
Yeah.
I can't, one of my rules is it can't be longer than Star Wars. If you're longer than Star Wars, you have a problem, because I'm not doing a Marvel movie with you, but 90 minutes is a really long time to invest. And that's when I'm going to grab your video, throw it into my summarizer, and I'll just look at the AI notes. So I want to transition a little bit into the AI stuff now as well. How is AI changing the element of gamification? Is it looking at the results, or is it also going into the design of the gamification process?
So from a learning and development point of view, we are working on lots of different things using AI. Specifically, to answer your question, one of the really exciting frontiers is gamified agents. Okay, so I want you to imagine a world, okay, where basically you are put into a narrative. So this is one of the projects that we're working on at the moment with a huge financial global company, where basically you're put into a virtual world and there is a crime that needs to be solved. It's in the area of financial crime. And what's going to happen is there are going to be multiple different agents that have clear and defined personalities that appear at certain times within the scene. And those characters are programmed with a set of learning objectives and a set of learning outcomes. Okay. And so it is your job to move through the game in order to solve the crime. And so one of the really exciting things we're seeing is that rather than have a one-to-many learning experience, because of these autonomous AI agents, we are able to allow for very different learning experiences. Okay. So through the AI agents, you'll have coaches, you'll have guides, but you'll also have people that are going to impart specific information. So you're not going to get lost in the narrative, because, you're going to have your coach and your guide that you can go back and go, I don't know what the question I should be asking. Where should I go? What room should I go into? But the idea is really clearly that these autonomous agents have a specific role in the story, and that meets a learning objective and a learning outcome. So in order to get through the learning experience, you need to basically meet the learning objectives and the learning outcome in order to pass through and solve the crime. So that's one of the things that we're seeing, which is just going to be insane. So what that means is that imagine you have been through anti-money laundering 10 times, okay? You're a seasoned banker, or you've just started. You can create the same narrative world, but you can have two completely different experiences. And this is good because, exactly as you say, some people have 2 hours to walk through a game and some people don't, or some people will need to. One of the common objections that we get in the corporate learning environment is, I'm learning things or being forced to basically do things that I already know. And we want to strip that out.
So this gives people the ability to have a different experience. Instead of everyone talking to the same character, asking the same questions, getting the same answers, now you can, because you already know a lot more, that can be in your answer, go, and then you can go faster. Is that what you mean?
Yeah, so
Okay.
typically what will happen is you'll go in and you'll have a conversation with the guide and mentor. For this particular narrative, you walk into the reception of your office building, virtually I'm talking about, you see your boss and you basically have a chat about things. And as the boss is asking you questions, he's obviously assessing at what level you operate in the bank. So have you got 2 years experience? Have you got 5 years experience? Have you got 15 years experience? So the guide automatically puts you on a path, and then that path defines the agents you will meet as you move through the chapters. So that's basically the way it works. And obviously, if you're able to shortcut and not go into certain rooms and not have certain experiences, then you'll just shortcut that particular agent and go on to the next agent.
How tight are the guide rails? Is it possible for people to have creative solutions or to talk to the third person before they talk to the third person? Like how much variability or how much possibility of surprise is allowed in there?
So typically we guardrail really clearly learning objectives and learning outcomes, okay? Because that's what the corporate learning and development department is measured on. Have you delivered the knowledge, okay? Or, okay, have they proved that they know it already, okay? So you've got learning objectives and learning outcomes. You don't have to, if you're a seasoned professional, you don't have to go through the learning objectives as long as you can prove that you understand the learning outcomes, right? So in terms of flexibility and in terms of narrative throughout the room, you've got as much creativity as you want, but we're not building out stuff that doesn't necessarily allow people to move through efficiently. So you can imagine if you're working in a bank, you don't want people within this game for 5 hours. That's just not a good use of their time. So you want them to move through it efficiently, but you want them to move through it in a way that's creatively interesting enough for them to actually be able to not only learn the information, but also be able to think through the application of that information in order to solve a crime, or at least in this case, it's solve a crime, but also be able to identify similar sort of patterns that may happen in their real world in order to ensure that financial crime does not happen in a bank.
So there are also things that are not company specific, but can be really important that very rarely get discussed, such as data security, corporate security, social engineering. For example, how many times has someone just left a USB stick in a parking lot and then someone picks it up and plugs it into a computer inside the building? So is that the type of thing that you guys could create? And then, of course, it would be something that lots of companies could use because it could just be a universal set of things of don't let anyone plug a USB into your computer. Don't let anyone see you enter your password. Like it sounds silly, but there was a major hack last year and they made everyone reset their passwords except the head of security. And that's whose password had been hacked. He goes, not me, my password would never get hacked. And so that's why the person, and it was like a really big. It was like a major thing, and this person was able to keep access to the company for 2 years because the only person to reset their password was the person who'd been hacked. Because you often deal with that with heads of right. Someone wouldn't be me because I'm the head of security. Like, I would never make a mistake. I couldn't get social engineered, but there are more and more of these things happening. And I'll give you another example that's heavy on my mind is that a lot of people put all of their data. I know talking to someone yesterday who goes, "Oh, I accidentally put." Like a customer's phone number into data we uploaded to ChatGPT, right? And that, depending upon your industry, if you're in the medical industry, that's a crime, right? You violate HIPAA. That's such a big deal to act. Oh, I accidentally uploaded someone's medical records and doctors have already done that where they ask ChatGPT a question, forgetting that it's transmitted over the internet, that it's a non-secure platform. So that's an area that I'm thinking about is because people are not realizing there's a shift when you go from using Microsoft Word to using Google Docs, for example. Now you're online. When you're using Google Translate, that's going to a server and back. Even if the server is secure, there's always the risk of the man in the middle attack. And I know we're going into security, but I'm just curious about kind of something of those directions with gamification where you can, and maybe because you brought up a crime, which I thought was very clever, that got me very interested. You got my attention. So that's what I'm thinking about there. So I'm curious about that direction of kind of universal things.
Yeah, I think in the corporate learning world, so there's two things. First of all, we're trying to build a business consumer learning companion. So the way we would treat data there is just very much individual. So because of the information that the learning companion needs, this is really sensitive data. It's things like, have you got neurodiversity needs? What are your goals and aspirations for your life? There's some really sensitive data. So we would never, that data would never be shared with the open internet. So that is basically housed within our RAG and within our kind of secure environment. When we are creating these platforms for corporates, exactly the same would happen. So we would put any sensitive data into, or any data would basically be in a walled garden. So let's say they wanted to have their website, their wikis, their product development roadmap, their blah, blah, blah. We would basically put all of that in the data lake. And then basically there would be individual RAGs for individual people as they were accessing the database and building up a better understanding of what was in that data lake in order to do their job better. The way we operate, we don't have access to the open internet. That would not be a use case that would be possible. It would, no human being wants the open internet to know whether they've got neurodiversity issues. And likewise, no corporate wants to ask the open internet, what are my service level agreements? That's just not a
Right.
thing.
What I more mean is people are already doing it and not realizing it. They're not realizing that ChatGPT is not secure. For example, ChatGPT released an app for Mac. It turned out it was storing all of the data as unsecured text. So
Yeah.
all of the data that you transmitted back and forth was completely unsecured on your computer. It wasn't randomized. It wasn't secured in any way. It was just literally a text file that anyone could just double click and open, which you wouldn't think, but that's kind of what I'm talking about. Like training employees to be aware of what security risks are and how to approach AI in general with using in the office, what you should upload and what you shouldn't upload. Because I just experienced so many people that aren't thinking about these things. Like you can, like they want to upload their customer files to do research, but you need to remove things like the credit card numbers, the phone numbers, the last names at the very least, right? So you just want to look at the data in aggregate, but people are forgetting. And the other thing I see is where people put a ton of their data into a chatbot that like is their customer service bot, but those can be socially engineered. So it's don't just, so that's kind of what I'm talking about. Is there a level of training? I realize you guys are doing great security, which I love. I love that you had a solid answer for that. But it's more like people are already doing so many crazy things. Like I know of an embassy in Europe that was using Google Translate for top secret documents. So it's like people do things that are like, as soon as you hear it, you go, that doesn't sound right. That sounds like a terrible idea. But we forget, like everyone's really excited about Microsoft Copilot, but that just means everything on your computer is now connected to the internet. When I remember 10, 20 years ago, most companies had an intranet, which means you could only access company data. And if there were websites you could look at, it had downloaded the website, but you couldn't interact with it. Like you could just look, for example, if you worked at a company that was selling stuff online, you could see what your website said to make sure if someone called and asked a question, you could match it. But now so many companies do have lowered their security levels for convenience. And we're seeing so many of these like corporate issues with hacking, and it's usually a silly mistake.
Yeah, I
Can
mean,
you train
Jonathan,
that out of them?
I absolutely love the point. Like, I really do think that people are rushing towards these kind of business consumer, essentially, these business consumer AI co-pilots and things like that. And they actually do not realize that they're letting those co-pilots in that are meant to be used in a personal setting, in a corporate setting. I think the point is really important. And again, I think it goes back to this idea of not really understanding the world of AI and the digital skills that people need in order to basically operate in the moving between a kind of SaaS environment, all hosted in the cloud. And now we've got this emergence of AI. But certainly I think we are noticing that more. And over the next year, I'm sure we will have more and more stories about that. But certainly the way we would approach it is that in exactly the same way as we would approach money laundering. So putting people in an experiential digital world effectively so that they could experience the reality of these issues. So that's the way we would approach it. Because if you can give people a real life example of that in a kind of story and a narrative, and you can apply gaming mechanics in and around it, they're much more likely to be able to remember the experience and then basically not make the mistake of mimicking that behavior. But I think the point is really fascinating because I just don't think that people realize how much data they are giving to some of these models. It's just that it's clear to them.
Yeah, I'm always surprised people think that I'm a super technology person, but I'm the opposite. I'm very analog. This is my job, but I don't have any of the devices you can talk to because it's like it's listening all the time. You know what I mean? And it's like I used to be in phone sales, and I remember we would take a sales call, and the person would forget because they're on hold so long, and they would say things or do things that you wouldn't want anyone to hear because they're on mute, not hold. Oh my gosh. So even then, when it's an actual person on the call, so just thinking of the things you would do. So it's we get so used to these technologies that we forget a bit of common sense because we're so familiar with them that we forget, oh, that thing's listening all the time. It records everything. Every we record every Zoom meeting, we record everything this. So we get so used to it and that we develop these habits of just trying something new. And exactly like you said, like I've talked to some people that are in the medical industry. Medical people use specific AIs that are HIPAA compliant. Because people sometimes say to me, if the doctor is, oh, should I use ChatGPT? I go, no,
Yeah.
do not. Please, any tool you use, make sure it's compliant with your country and your industry. Same for lawyers, same for bankers. There's whenever you have client or customer confidential data, there's certain requirements that I'm not an expert on. I'm just aware they exist. I know enough to know that there's this whole different world. And so that's why I'm very interested in that is there a way to teach people to be more careful and to think about these things that are just getting passed over? So I love what you're talking about. I'm very interested now that I understand the type of experiences you're creating. It's like a murder mystery party where there's all these different characters and there's things happening. And at the end of it, you've actually enjoyed learning something and that it's very strategic, starting to
Yeah.
come
And I
together
think
for me.
the point really is there is that when you're in the corporate learning game, or when you're selling enterprise platforms to corporates, you are basically creating their own version of AI, right? So you might be using a model like Llama or whatever it might be, but ultimately there is no busting out the open internet. That's just not a thing that happens and if it does, then obviously they've got they need to check in with their purchasing departments, because that would not meet most corporates' rules and regulations for security of data and stuff like that. So most large corporates have security requirements that need to meet certain ISO standards or whatever it is. And certainly being part of the open internet would just not be, it wouldn't be allowed in terms of, you wouldn't get through procurement, quite simply. You wouldn't get through procurement. So most most large corporates, when they're talking about AI, particularly in the realm of learning and development, they would want to basically set the guardrails according to whatever they permitted to go into their data lake. And only that information can be pulled upon in order to train, nurture, develop skills, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so my final question is, there are some questions that you're like not allowed to ask people anymore. Whereas maybe in a learning platform, it makes sense where you mentioned earlier neurodiversity, or you have other issues where maybe, and this is obviously, this is stuff that I've lived in America for a long time, right? But I don't think you're supposed to, you could just walk up to someone and say, what's wrong with you? I don't think you can say things like that, or what's your condition? Pretty sure you're not supposed to. So but it might make sense within the learning game to then adjust it. So how do you deal with that to where that data might need to be in the game, but you want to make sure that the bosses can't access it, right? So there's like that line, which is very tricky. So I'm interested in that.
Yeah. So the way that we would do that is, first of all, the product that we're developing is a learning companion. Okay. So it exists to help the individual fulfill their best potential. Okay. So the more that Zavmo, that's the name of the thingy product, the more Zavmo understands about what gets you curious, what gets your attention, what makes you concentrate, what makes you focus, the more Zavmo can adapt the learning, tailor the learning to your individual needs. Okay. So when we start off having a conversation with an AI, the first thing is to create an area of trust. Yeah. So the more that you're willing to invest in conversations with Zavmo, the better that Zavmo will be in delivering a learning experience. So the first thing is, do you understand what Zavmo does? And do you understand how Zavmo treats your data? Because obviously we can't create trust if you've got a question in the back of your mind and you haven't actually asked it. So during the process of basically onboarding the individual, it takes some time to say, look, is this of interest to you? Do you want to know what happens to your data? Is it important? Because it's important to me that you know that yada, yada, yada. So the onboarding, not only of the corporate, but also of the individual, is really important. The other thing is that Zavmo can tell if so I'm dyslexic. Okay. I'm very dyslexic. So if I'm typing something in, typing anything, notes or an email, you can pretty much guarantee that I probably can't get through more than 5 words without a spelling error. My grammar is really bad because basically I'm slightly ADHD as well. So what happens is I'm just like, I'm just firing all these words. And when I'm interacting with Zavmo can tell because A, I can't spell properly. B, I don't use grammar properly. C, I don't, and then also the other thing is because I'm ADHD, I will basically, my concentration will go. So I'm not able to maintain a conversation with Zavmo for that long. And then with regards to the being dyslexic, with being dyslexic, I've got really bad short-term memory. So you can tell me a fact and then basically I really won't remember it, but my long-term memory is good. So that's one of the things that certain people with dyslexia have. So when you're interacting with Zavmo will be able to tell. So even if you don't tell Zavmo, yes, I have ADHD and I have dyslexia, when you're actually interacting with it, it will be able to tell because you might be talking about, I don't know, the mechanics of whatever it might be. Zavmo will ask a question and basically I'll just tail off or whatever happens. And so the goal of Zavmo is to basically ensure that you meet the learning objective and learning outcomes in a cadence that you have agreed with Zavmo. So it basically goes through kind of 4 steps. First of all is discover your ideal life design. So it's basically taking into consideration what education you've got, what you want to do for your career, what really motivates you and gets you super excited. Then it basically presents a development roadmap, and that is benchmarked on national qualifications. So here we are only interested in the ability to passport those skills. So if you're learning something, it should be benchmarked against national or international standards. Then after that, it goes into delivery. And then after that, it goes into demonstration. So that's the process of the way it works. Going through that, it's similar to the way the brain works. So first of all, we're getting attention, then we're getting focus, then we're getting reinforcement with demonstration. It all goes back to how the brain works and then putting the gamification and the learning structure onto the AI in terms of the prompt engineering in order to deliver the optimal learning experience.
Very interesting. It's very clever. Now it's starting to come together for me. So I'm glad we had this chat. For people that are interested in gamification, corporate stuff, or just want to learn more about what you're doing, what's the best place to find you online and connect with you and see all the amazing things you're working on?
Yeah, so I do a lot on LinkedIn. The best way to get, if you want to know what's in my brain and in the team's brain in terms of moving forward in the world of AI and learning development and what we believe the future will be, there's lots and lots of articles on what we're building now in terms of Zavmo AI, where we think the future of AI will go and how it will impact learning and development. LinkedIn is absolutely the best place in terms of all of the articles and stuff that I write. If you want to see the product and you want to see a bit more about what we're doing, we should be soft launching in sort of October of this year, so October 2024, and just go to zavmo.ai. And yeah, and also I am fascinated by this field. So if there are any kind of L&D leaders out there that want to chat about the future of AI and how it will impact learning and development, then obviously very excited to chew the fat and get different opinions.
Wonderful. I'll make sure to put those in the show notes and below the YouTube video. Thank you so much for being here today, Juliette. Guys, this has been another amazing episode of the Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Thanks for listening to today's episode. Starting with AI can be scary. ChatGPT Profits is not only a bestseller, but also the missing instruction manual to make mastering ChatGPT a breeze. Bypass the hard stuff and get straight to success with ChatGPT Profits. As always, I would love for you to support the show by paying full price on Amazon. We can get it absolutely free for a limited time at artificialintelligencepod.com/gift. Thank you for listening to this week's episode of the Artificial Intelligence Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you never miss another episode. We'll be back next Monday with more tips and tactics on how to leverage AI to escape that rat race. Head over to artificialintelligencepod.com now to see past episodes, leave a review, and check out all of our socials.